Welcome to Ottawa Experts. We are joined tonight by Erin Blaskie and Anna Keller. We have a fantastic show lined up. We are going to be talking about legal considerations and marketing for your business. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests. So Anna, thank you for joining us.
Great
Erin,
to be here.
Thank you.
Welcome. So I thought we'd start by just telling our guests a little bit about what you do, who you are, your background, and Anna, why don't we start with you?
Great. I'm a corporate lawyer in Ottawa, and my practice is mainly, I deal with business issues, so often we call it business law.
Okay.
So my clients are both businesses who may be dealing with something as simple as a contract dispute or as complicated as selling their business.
Okay.
And basically everything in between. So I help businesses start right to selling and even raising money. So that's the type of law I practice.
Right.
And on the consumer side, people who are dealing with businesses. So they have contracts they're negotiating with a business, consultants. So if there's a business involved in some respect, that's the type of law I would get involved with.
Okay. And what made you decide to get into corporate law?
I took a bit of an interesting path to law.
Okay.
So I was a journalist for a number of years.
Okay.
And I started as a journalist when I was 18, working in North Bay at the North Bay Nugget.
Okay.
Small newspaper with
The North Bay Nugget.
North Bay Nugget.
Can we talk about the North Bay Nugget just for a bit? Sorry. I need to know more about the North Bay Nugget.
It's a fantastic newspaper. Great group of people.
Yes.
I was young and I really wanted to be a journalist.
Okay.
And I basically knocked on their door and kept knocking till they let me in.
Okay.
So I wrote for a number of years for the Nugget and
Yes.
covered everything from sports to entertainment to business to
Yes.
everyday news that happens
Whatever
in a
the
small
Nugget
town.
needed.
Exactly. Whatever the Nugget needed.
Okay.
So I started there and I went to journalism school at Carleton.
Okay.
I have a journalism degree, and I wrote for a number of newspapers across the country, and I eventually ended up at the Toronto Star.
Okay.
So when I was at the Star, I wrote for hard news, so I wrote for the A section, but I also wrote for the business section. And that's where I sort of developed, sort of an interest in business.
Right.
And I started to see these issues and complicated legal issues that businesses were dealing with.
Okay.
So I sort of saw the other side of it, and I got to talk to a lot of businesses and a lot of business owners about what they were doing.
Right.
So when I started contemplating my next step and going to law school, it seemed like a natural fit.
Absolutely. I mean, you had all of the problems firsthand. You were hearing them as a reporter, collecting them and thinking, how can I help, And I guess your hands are sort of tied as a reporter in that respect, but going to law school.
Only so much you can do writing a story in one day.
That's right.
But it was, it was a good eye-opener. And I guess it hadn't been the first time I'd sort of heard some of these issues. My family is a family of entrepreneurs,
Okay.
of business owners. My family owned a Loblaws grocery store in North Bay.
Okay.
My uncle owns it now, and
Yes.
my cousins and I, everyone, we all worked there in high school, and we all
Okay.
had this experience. And
Did you sell the Nugget there?
we also sold the Nugget. So the dinner table conversation on Sunday nights was about business, and
Okay.
so I heard these lingo and this language from a very early age, and sort of heard these problems business owners had, and
Right.
how excited it was when you reach a goal. So this seemed like a really natural fit for me.
Okay, that's fantastic. Now, while we're talking about being an entrepreneur and entrepreneurship, we are joined by a digital entrepreneur, if you will, but you have a very interesting story as well that started, I think, when you were knee-high to a grasshopper with a Commodore 64.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so please tell us about that.
I have to go way back
Right.
for the story. But so basically, when I was 6 years old, my dad came to me and my sister and had this Commodore 64, and he said, here you go, here's a computer, hook it up.
Yeah.
And we'll play with it, we'll figure it out. So we did, and I spent most of my childhood on computers from a very, from a very young age. But the neat thing was my sister and I used to play, we used to play games all the time, and we would make up games like we would play school or we would play, Office or Home. But the Office part was the thing that I loved the most.
Okay.
So we would play Office, and we would get all set up with our Commodore, and I would be the president, of course.
Yes, of course.
I'm the bigger sister, so,
Right.
So I would be the president, she would be my secretary, and I would be assigning her all of these, tasks to do, and she'd have to do them on the word processor on the Commodore. And so it's sort of a pattern that emerged from the time I was really young, all through my life. I was actually kind of the opposite of you. I had nobody in my family, in my immediate family, that was an entrepreneur or owned a business. But I finished school, got out of school, and then I was sort of left in this space where I was working for somebody, but feeling very much like I was meant to be, doing something else. And I knew that something else was probably for myself, on my own, doing whatever it was that I kind of thought I might be able to bring all of my interests to. And so I was on my computer at my job, which, I shouldn't be looking up other jobs when I'm at my job, but I did. And I happened to come across a website of a virtual assistant.
Okay.
And so this was 10 years ago. And I kind of looked at the website and I said, I could do this. Like, this is exactly what I'm doing now as an administrative and executive assistant, but I could do it online.
Right.
And this would be great. So I started a website. I called the first business Services, Etc., which was very creative.
Right.
I'm sure any branding person now would roll over a little bit about that. But I started the website. 2 weeks later, I had my first client. 6 months later, I had a full roster, so I quit my job and dove headfirst into it. And it was really exciting, but also scary, because at the time, 10 years ago, nobody was really doing what I was doing. Like,
and what services were you offering at that time? Like, what did your business entail?
Yeah, so at the time it was a lot of executive assistant and administrative assistant style services. So we were doing word processing. We were doing, oh my gosh, I'm trying to think back then, spreadsheets. I mean, it was all very admin based. And I just happened to, because I had been on the internet from an early age and adopted a lot of that technology, I knew about, for example, like blogging before a lot of other people did. So I was able to bring that knowledge and technology to my clients in such a way that they didn't know even existed. Which was exciting, yeah.
That's exciting. So tonight we're also going to talk about some of the legal issues that surround businesses, and we do have a few slides as well that you have provided us that we're going to refer to throughout the segment. So if you could perhaps bring up the first slide, which we'd like to talk about, that would be great. So we have it here.
So this is a great story, and it's so common to hear an entrepreneur who is so excited and found a niche and wanted to start their own business. And I get so excited about working with startup businesses because they come in with such great energy. So often people ask me when they come in and they want to start a business, they say, what do I have to do to start a business? How do I do that? And often the question turns to what kind of business do you want to start. So if you're by yourself and you have an idea, often you start with what we call being a sole proprietor. And that's literally one person starting a business, and it's as simple as the classic example of a lemonade stand at the end of the driveway. So you start doing something, you hang up your shingle, and you have a business. There's very, very few barriers to entry from a legal standpoint to start that type of business. So many people start there, and that's how they get going, because they just start doing something to see if they're, if they can make a go at it.
And do they need any legal advice to do that, or can they just go ahead and start their business?
It depends, I would say, what type of business you're doing. So if someone came to me and they said, they're, for example, they're designing a new app, and they're they're building code. So they're in their basement on their computer, probably not a Commodore 64 anymore, but there's very few risks to that. So the amount of legal advice you need may be more tailored to things like intellectual property, like copyright, trademark, patents, depending on what you're doing. For example, if you told me you wanted to start a food truck as a type of business, there's more risks involved in that.
Because you're serving food to the public.
Exactly. As soon as you're dealing with the public on a regular basis, there's going to be more risks. So for that type of business, I may suggest, maybe a sole proprietorship isn't the way to go. Maybe, we incorporate the business and create a corporation.
And how does that protect the sole proprietor from, how does that differ? I guess is my question.
So there's actually three types of business. So a sole proprietorship, a partnership, and a corporation. And a partnership, if I could start there first, is just two sole proprietors or two or more sole proprietors who come together to work together.
So they split the risks equally?
Split the risks, they split the revenue. There are some ways we can change that 50-50 split, if you will, if there's two people. With a partnership agreement, we can vary that. So that might be something you'd want to talk to a lawyer about. But the liability is still your own personally. So there's nothing separating you from your business. So the sole proprietorship and the partnership have that in common, that there's no separate legal thing. You are the business in essence. So if someone unfortunately decided to sue you, they'd be suing you personally.
So that means your house, your car, anything that's personally yours is on the table.
Exactly. So often when people ask me this, it also sort of depends where they are in life. I say, if you're, right out of high school or university and you have no assets, you've got some student debt, and you're used car. Exactly. So, you have very little to risk at that point.
Yes.
If you're later in life and maybe this is your second career, you're retired, you have a pension, you have a house, RSPs, you have a lot more to risk at that point. So that often plays into the discussion, what kind of business are we going to start?
Okay. And so often that would be when they would incorporate and they have sort of a legal shelter.
Yeah, so starting a corporation means we set up a separate legal entity. So it's separate from the people running it.
Okay.
And in that case, there's some forms you file with the government, either provincially or federally. It's helpful to have a lawyer get involved at that point to make sure all the forms are filled out correctly. But you literally set up a separate legal person.
Okay.
And it exists without you, if you will. Someone has to direct it and run it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the people who start it. So the corporation could carry on after the people who started. But setting up that separate legal person means that all the risk is there.
Right.
So if you had your food truck, for example, then, if somebody got sick eating your food and they decided to sue you, they would sue the corporation, not you personally. So the only assets that would be up for grabs would be what was in the corporation. Your house and your pension and everything else would be safe. So depending on the type of business, that plays into the discussion of what type of business structure we should set up.
Okay. And now, Erin, how long generally did it take you to set up your businesses? Was it an arduous process or was it fairly straightforward?
I actually started, when I had nothing. I was 21.
Okay.
I was in that space of sort of being like, well, I'm living at my parents' house and I have, don't really have a savings account.
Right.
But I knew that I wanted to do this. So for me, it was actually quite easy. Like I went online, I registered the business under, my name as a sole proprietor, and I started it. Like I put up a website and jumped right in. So for me, it wasn't a long process because I didn't have to go through all of this, setting up a separate entity or anything. I just started it. But again, if I was to do it today, with a house and assets and things, I would probably go a longer route and take a little bit longer to make sure it was set up right and, that kind of thing. But back in the day, no.
Okay. And
21,
it's fairly straightforward to go online and set up your own